Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today. Friends, today's episode is a bit of a departure from our usual lineup, but in the best possible way. My guest, Dr. Brianna Stubbs, isn't just a world class athlete, she's also a cutting edge scientist working at the forefront of metabolic research at the Buck focusing on how we can slow aging at the cellular level. Now, you might be wondering, what does that have to do with a show about movement, mindset, and pushing limits through outdoor sports? Well, everything. Because what Brianna is working on could reshape the way we all think about performance, energy, recovery, and longevity. Her work explores the same questions we wrestle with on this podcast. How do we stay sharp, strong, and active as we age? And how can science help us get there? Brianna's story is fascinating. She is an endurance rower who competed for Great Britain, set a world record rowing across the English Channel, now helps decode how ketones, metabolism, and cellular aging affect our athletic and everyday lives. So, in this episode, you will learn what happens to our metabolism as we age and what can we do about it. Then, how ketones, fasting, and metabolic flexibility might influence performance and recovery. Why Brianna left elite sport to work on the science of human health span, and then what the everyday athlete can take away from the lab and apply on the trail, in the gym, or simply in life. It's a deep science informed chat, but I hope accessible and practical as well. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so right now I'm at my home in Richmond, Point Richmond, which is in the East Bay area. And this morning I had full breakfast. My standard breakfast is a big old scoop of Greek yogurt with an extra scoop of protein powder and then a big handful of frozen berries. And this morning, because I wasn't at work and I have a few extra bits that I can add into it, I had some flaxseed and some chia as well to get some bit more nutrition in there. But I'm a big protein girly in the morning, and Greek yogurt's good for that.
Your breakfast is so similar to mine, but I believe that you also went for a nice round of
Mm-hmm.
outdoor exercise this morning.
Always.
So, do you get your breakfast in pre-exercise to fuel up, or is it a recovery?
Typically recovery. So I had a little bit of peanut butter before I went for my run, but I can't do a big feed right before I go out in the morning. So I had a cup of, you can tell from the accent, I'm a Brit. So I had a cup of English builder's tea, get a little bit of hydration and some caffeine in before I went running. And then, I'm a peanut butter from the jar lady as well. So a little bit of peanut butter from the jar. It was an easy run today. I've got a big run tomorrow. So it wasn't too strenuous. So, a little bit of peanut butter set me up, and then came back and had my yogurt and berry melange as a recovery when I got back.
I am I'm an average athlete and a humble podcaster. But now that I know that you and Jamie Justice, who was on the podcast recently,
Mhm.
I have this one thing in common with you, which is I also love my peanut butter. We'll have to
Just
stop right now because otherwise I'll have to go around and like raid my pantry. That's got me
hmm
salivating. Brianna,
hmm
for those of us who don't know who are you and what do you do?
So I work at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging. I'm the director of translational science, which means that my North Star is taking the basic science that's done on the bench at the Buck and figuring out how to make it applicable to people. So when I joined the Buck, I was involved as a subject matter expert, helping companies commercialize discoveries that came from the Buck. And then in the more recent years, I've actually been more of what my boss calls an entrepreneur and helped to co-establish the clinical research unit at the Buck. So last 2 or 3 years, like mainly thinking a lot about how to answer the same kind of aging biology questions that we do with our mice and our worms and our flies, and how we can answer those in people. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit about the different things that I do, but one of my favorite studies that I hope we have a chance to talk about is a study where I'm studying aging athletes and trying to understand, hopefully, I mean, I think we're both probably biased, right? We think that exercise is good for aging, but nobody has ever studied the hallmarks of aging in people who are really elite. Not just like, the problem is when you read a paper about exercise, the average for the American population is so low that someone can be like a high exerciser if they do 2 hours a week. That would be, I've seen papers where it's like, yeah, these are active older adults and it's like 2 hours a week. But the people that we're recruiting are people who are still running marathons and competing in the senior games and all kinds of, really, it's been super inspiring. So that's one of the things I'm working on right now that I'm really passionate about. But if you had to distill it down, it's like understanding how we can age more resiliently from a biological lens and doing it in people.
Beautiful. Well, Brianna, welcome again to the Ageless Athlete podcast. You have had such a unique journey, elite rower,
Mm-hmm.
world champion, and now a scientist at the forefront of metabolic research. Before we dive into your work, I would love to start with your roots. I read that your dad rode the Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
across the Atlantic
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah.
So, growing up in a family like that, did you even have a choice but to become an endurance athlete yourself?
I mean, you'd think not, but my sister actually isn't really into sport at all. So I guess, it was, there was always, I was very easy for my dad to go and bring along. I think he'd, not that he wanted a son, but I was kind of like the replacement son for him. We would go out as early as I can remember. I remember, I think my first ever running competition was aged 7. And it was a 1 mile competition. And my dad took me out training with him and he made me do hill repeats up and down. We lived by the beach and there was sort of like a zigzag that would kind of go up and down the cliff to the beach. And he made me do hill repeats until I was sick. And I have a really vivid memory of like, working out and training with my dad at an early age. And But I was very easy for him. I had that drive and that hunger to compete and that sort of drive to be out there, as well as my sister is much more mellow, and my mum's also kind of, they'll do things, but they don't have the itch for it like that I have and that my dad has. So it's been as long as I can remember. I was kind of my dad's partner in crime. We used to surf together. I have another memory of being, I think I must have been 9 or 10, and we went down to the Cornish coast, so kind of out where there's big waves there and it's cold, it's the Atlantic Ocean. And I think it must have been, February, the spring break kind of time in the UK. And my dad takes me out surfing and I'm this tiny little girl. I'm in a short arms and sleeves wetsuit. He's in a full wetsuit, of course. I'm in a short wetsuit. And he just chucked me out into the waves with a board, and he'd be off doing his own thing, and he'd be kind of keeping an eye on me. But I'm pretty sure a few times I was under the water, churning around a little bit. And another thing that happened on that trip was the short wetsuit. It gave me like neck rash, and it looked like someone had tried to hang me or something because I had been so rubbed raw by this wetsuit. But I was a very hard kid, and I would kind of do anything to go out and be playing with my dad out in the outdoors from a really young age. Lots and lots of, we used to camp overnight in the caves together. We lived near, on the coast, but near old like limestone quarries. So in the cliffs, there was a section of the cliffs kind of cut out. And my dad used to take me down and we would watch the lighthouse and watch the stars and listen to the ocean. And he would take these little tea light candles and put them all in the caves. And it was just, like lots of experiences like that when I was growing up. So I was very lucky.
Well, sounds like a beautiful, adventurous upbringing. Though, just one thing, so your dad had this full wetsuit, but he gave you, as somebody who is he's trying to wean into the outdoors, this lighter weight shorty.
Yeah.
Normally the advice, for example, the advice I got when I was trying to take people out surfing again in the Bay Area where the water is cold is comfortize as much as possible. Make sure they're warm, make sure they have a nice board, make sure they have a hot cup of cocoa after. But it sounds like your dad kind of threw you into the deep end.
Yeah, I think, when you have a kid who's 8 or 10 or something, they're not going to be in that wetsuit for very long. So I don't think he was keen on, buying or renting me a proper wetsuit so that I was actually comfortable. Yeah, I'd have no idea how I made that work and how I kept coming back for more. But, here we are. And I'm remembering it fondly now, even though I must have been pretty cold at the time.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24/7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code AGELESS15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code AGELESS15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
And perhaps your dad knew you well and knew maybe what you were capable of.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us, again, like you throw a little kid into cold water with like a light wetsuit, most of us would revolt and maybe not want to go back into surfing again. So what is it about you that perhaps took on that challenge and embraced?
I think I've always enjoyed or always been comfortable being uncomfortable. I think it was always been a challenge to see how far I can kind of push myself and how much I can resist the urge to give up. And it's taken me a long time to even be able to kind of entertain, I don't have to do that really hard thing. I very much, is there something like, is there a mountain in front of me? I'm going up that mountain. Is there, when I finished rowing, I moved out to the Bay Area, and like the joke I like to make is I wanted something a bit more relaxed after my elite rowing career, and I took up Ironman triathlon, and then it was like as soon as I started that, it was never like, oh, I'm just going to do this for fun. It was like, I'm going to try and qualify for the World Championships in Kona, and it's it's kind of one thing after another. And then after that, I I took up trail running, and I didn't just do a 50K. I did a 250-mile 6-day stage race. This is I'm training for a 100-mile race. That's the next thing that I'm training for. So maybe I'm not fully out of that phase just yet, but that's how I've always operated. Like, what's the biggest, most audacious, most difficult thing? And so I think in a way, in a micro way, getting through that surfing session in the cold wetsuit, in the cold with short wetsuit, it's kind of how I got going with that.
Indoctrination by cold water. Okay, so I also believe you were the youngest person to row across the English Channel when you were but a young teen at 12,
Yep.
and then you went on to do these do triathlons and like epic runs. What do you think is the most audacious thing that you have set out to do?
Um, I feel like, just going into my dad's office at age 11 or 12 and saying I wanted to row the English Channel, that was like audacious at the time and kind of out of nowhere. I think the thing that was the biggest endeavor was, getting to the level to compete at the world level at rowing. That was the single most longest, most hardest thing that I did. And then I think that the race that I did last year, the Dragon's Back, was the single most like kind of intense, physically hard thing that I did, like much harder even than like an Ironman triathlon, because it just, broke your body down and broke your mind down. And there was like sleep deprivation after 6 days of, getting in at 9 p.m. and getting up again at 5 a.m. So that was really, really hard. You like going on trial the different flavors of hard. It was interesting because I was doing the Dragon's Back, the stage race, 240 miles over 6 days. And I was thinking like, yeah, I've never been as wiped out as this before, but it really didn't take away from the fact that it did take me, 8-10 years of just daily grinding, daily showing up to be like a world champion as well. So, it's different things can be hard in different ways. They can be like intensely hard. They can be hard just because you have to show up over such a long time. So yeah, hard to pick. I'm proud of all of the things I've done, and they've all given me something different. I mean, in an academic sense, like doing my PhD and doing the rowing at that level at the same time as doing my PhD was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done, and wouldn't go back and do that again.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think if I look back at my life and I think about you know accomplishments versus having to slog during school and university, I think I would choose the sporting, even type 2 stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Just way quicker. You went from being this high level athlete, this world champion athlete, to becoming a scientist studying metabolism and aging, right? So, fun question. Do you think of yourself as an athlete who became a scientist, or a scientist who happens to be an athlete?
Ooh, it was interesting because as you were asking that question, the way you laid it out was, an athlete who became a scientist, and like the two things happen very simultaneously, and it's really hard. I think, I often say that I'm really lucky to have been at the right place at the right time. Obviously, it took a lot of work and my interests and whatnot, but it was kind of like the perfect storm. I was at medical school, and I was an athlete first. I guess if anything, I was an athlete first. I was at medical school, and so I was always interested in science. Maybe if you're gonna force me to pick, I guess I'd say I'd always been an athlete. I was always interested and able academically and interested in a lot of things, always kind of leaned towards sciences, but I wasn't the kind of kid who exclusively had like science toys and was like building science experiments. I loved like dissection. If we had like a like a bird that had like a carcass, I used to love like kind of pulling it apart the bits. I used to love like collecting insects in the garden, and I would like tag snails with nail varnish and then release them and try and find them. Like I did a lot of sort of science adjacent things, but I also loved to read and I loved languages. I wasn't just a scientist as a teen, and then as I was sort of coming out of high school and into college, I knew that I wanted to work understanding the human body, helping, figure out things to help people with their lives. I think that in England, you choose to go to medical school directly out of high school, so really early. And it just seemed like something which married my interests in the human body and how it worked with my enjoyment of kind of communicating with people and making a difference. So that's how I ended up at medical school. And then I was training at a high level to compete on the junior and U23 national rowing team at that time. and participated in some of the research experiments that I ended up joining the research team after having been a participant in the experiment. So it was all kind of right place, right time, right research question. I saw the flyer and signed up to be in the study, so that was just luck in a way.
I can sense that you were drawn to the outdoor world, maybe sometimes by lack of choice, and then you were also deeply curious, and you chose to continue, uh, let's say, investing in your curiosity, and to the point that you're here today. But was there a turning point in the journey where you made that shift from wanting to also understand the body at a deeper level, right? Because obviously there is this connection between what you thrived on as an athlete and the science, and then wanting to focus on the work you do today.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting journey, because I feel like my early research career was very much informed by what I was doing at the time, which was elite performance. So a lot of the experiments I was involved with during my PhD were looking at getting that extra, 2% out of elite athletes, and using extreme exercise as a model for stressed metabolism. And that was then relevant to disease, but kind of my focus was on exercise metabolism as a model for other types of metabolic stress. And then I think it was kind of a shift in my own interest after I finished competing at like that really high level, but it kind of became apparent that using exercise and metabolic stress that you see during exercise was this super powerful model for various diseases and also aging. Lots of things that are accelerated or processes that are accelerated acutely with exercise are also accelerated in aging. So inflammation, oxidative stress, that kind of thing. But on the flip side, exercise itself is very powerfully protective for healthy aging as well. And it was something that I'd been sort of very focused on performance. One of the things that started getting me more broadly interested was I started doing work with the Department of Defense on resilience in the military. And again, that's sort of that sweet spot between physical and cognitive performance being really important, but also ultimately, they are experiencing accelerated aging because of all of the stresses of those jobs, the extreme environments that they put themselves in. And it's sort of, you start to see aging everywhere, and you start to see all of the cross, like the links and the connections between metabolic stress, whether it's from exercise or from being at altitude, and aging. And it just sort of kept being something that I kind of came back to, and that's sort of how I ended. It was a slow change rather than being one moment, perhaps.
Also,
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this.
okay, so now you're studying, let's say, metabolic strategies to slow aging, and you conducted all these studies, and you saw all this research. What excited you about the work that you're doing on its promise
Mm-hmm.
towards helping us prolong our, maybe both our lifespan and the quality of our aging years.
Yeah, so in the aging field, we call that idea that you just articulated health span. So really just focusing on how long can we be healthy? How long can we have fewer chronic diseases of aging? And we can kind of also think about squaring off the morbidity curve. So rather than kind of having 20 years where you kind of get more sick and your function declines and declines and declines and then you die, staying really high functioning and then having kind of a cliff where you just we would all, I'm sure, rather just be in our beds one night and just quietly pass away, having hugged our grandkids and like completed a crossword puzzle and been for a hike the day before. Like I think that nobody pictures the last few years of their life the way that like what is the reality for so many people now, which is poor physical or cognitive health. So it's just such a big mission. It's so important and it's relevant to everyone. It's understanding how we can democratize that as well. Like I'm really passionate about not coming up with a pill that's like the Tesla model that only like the super wealthy can afford. We have a lot of the tools to age better in our arsenal now. And so understanding how, and for me, obviously, exercise has been one of those really powerful things. And we know it's one of the most powerful ways we can live healthier. And so, trying to understand that better, to make it more compelling for people, to find ways to reach people where they're at, is, to me, it's probably one of the single most important problems that society is facing now is just, increasing lifespan, yes, burden on the healthcare system, burdens on various like social systems, but also just opportunities that we could, kind of reimagine what it is to grow old. Up until, a generation or two ago, if our life expectancy was in our 70s, you'd retire in your like early 60s and you'd have 10 years and it was fine to, putter around the house and garden. But now if we retire age 60, we could have 20 or maybe even 30 years of life. And if that could be high quality life, think of all the things that we could do. And I loved listening back to the episode that you did with my friend and colleague, Dr. Jamie Justice. She was talking about her mum going and, buying the van and traveling around and like, what if more people could live like that? And so finding ways to enable that, make it as accessible as possible. It's just so exciting. And even on the days, and recently, we've had a lot of turbulence in like biomedical research, and also just and I heard Dr. Eric Verdin, our CEO, was interviewed by the news recently, and just making a comment that scientists wouldn't do science if they wanted to make money, and in the way that we do it, kind of in a research setting, in a not-for-profit setting, scientists wouldn't do it. It's not like we're doing it for money. We're doing it because we really care about the mission and we're really curious, like you said. And so the opportunity to that ability to just explore things that I'm curious about, feel like you're making a difference, feel like you're working on an important problem. Those are things that, just keep me going through all the kind of difficult times and the busy times. And I've never had a day where I'm like, gosh, I wish I was doing another job. Even though when it's really hard, I wish that I had a better work-life balance, perhaps, or I had a bit more time, or it was a bit less demanding. But I've always been happy to be where I am and like working with the people that I am and all of those things.
Brianna, if I can ask you a personal question, and I apologize in advance, but normally you would be a little young to be in this podcast. I am in my 40s now, and I think I only started thinking about my mortality or maybe my decline after I crossed 35.
Yeah.
Why this focus, or what is it about this mission that inspires you to, let's say, commit your work at your age?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think that more people should be thinking about the aging process sooner, because all of the choice, and this comes from like my years as a lightweight rower where, every little marginal gain mattered, like every choice to have or not have like that one cookie that someone had like left out on the side, or every choice to have or not have that extra like 30 minutes of sleep versus staying out with friends. Like I used to kind of rationalize it to myself that you can't be perfect all the time, but if you can make like 8 to 9 out of 10 of the correct choices, then all of those are going to kind of accrue and build up interest for the long term. And I think about aging like that. Like if we were thinking about aging and how well we wanted to be in our 70s when we were in our 20s, we'd likely make some really different decisions. So I think that finding ways to bring aging into the conversation, empowering people that choices that they make, that they don't have to make all of the right choices. I think it's kind of frightening for people when they think, oh, is the only way to age well to be like the tech guru Brian Johnson and just, do everything right all of the time, take a million supplements. Like, if that's it, then like, why should we even bother? But I think that it's the one decision that's in front of you right now. Can you make that decision the right one? And if you're deciding to have the cookie, then there's a reason for that, because it's like good for your soul, right? It's not that you have to be perfect all of the time. So I think important to be thinking about aging earlier, because the earlier you think about it, the better position you're going to be when you start to age. Also, just there's just more and more older adults in society now. We're doing better at keeping people alive for longer, and I think that aging has been sort of sadly a bit of a taboo topic. Like every industry, I don't know whether idolizes is the right word. Lionize is the right word. Like, kind of youth is like this prized thing. Everyone wants to look younger. We don't talk about, we don't, in the Western culture, less so than perhaps, my impression of like Asian cultures, is there's more respect for elders. I feel like we're not really in a place where we always value and respect aging. And I think that that's just something that has to change generally. And now that we have, so many more years of quality life, thinking about ways to be more like intergenerational and like how we interact and working with people at different ages. So I mean, aging is not just for people who are at that age. You are aging, and it's important to understand aging from as early as when you're a child. It's so interesting to study how things change across the lifespan. And for women as well, this is something that is like personal to me. You reach your like, I'm 33, nearly 34, and in a year I'll be like a geriatric in terms of like having children, right? And so one of the areas that we have at the Buck is the Center for Female Reproductive Longevity and Equality, which is studying aging ovaries. And they call them the canary in the coal mine. It's the thing that becomes geriatric way before everything else in the body. And so for me, it's important to think about aging in your 30s, because this kind of thing is happening. And as an athlete, I feel different in my body exercising now than I did in my 20s. And there's things that I could have kind of put my body through now in my 20s that I couldn't now, but then equally things that I can do now that I couldn't do in my 20s. So it's, it's about celebrating those differences, understanding those differences, not shutting out or, diminishing the upsides of aging, because I think there are upsides. Aging shouldn't just be for people who are starting to really experience it, because we're all experiencing it all the time, and we can all make positive choices today that set us up for aging better, and that's empowering.
Well, I love that. And, it's funny, I look at the listener stats for this podcast, and most people seem to be over the age of 35.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes feel that we should have, well, when I tell younger people about the podcast, they sometimes roll their eyes. And I really think that more people should listen to what you just talked about,
Yeah.
which is healthy aging begins when one is still young. So one can be prepared just the same way we prepare, let's say, our finances and our life and our careers to be able to have those things, have that like that retirement nest egg. We should also invest in like a healthful aging nest egg.
Yeah.
And the earlier we think about it, the better.
And just, it's interesting. I feel like when you're younger, almost it feels like possibilities are infinite. And as you age, you start to either refocus on things that are more important for you, but you kind of, you almost, and it doesn't have to be this way. You almost take things off your own plate. You're like, well, I'm 35 now, and I do this to myself. I'm like, well, I'm 35. I'm never going to be as good at anything else in sport as I was at rowing. And like, okay, I'm okay with that, but it doesn't have to be like that. And some of the athletes that we're working with in our aging athlete study, they're still like breaking age group records, and like people still do like wonderful things. I mean, perhaps there's this paradigm where when you're young you can focus on performance to the exclusion of everything else. The possibilities kind of feel endless as you get older. I mean, to me as well, it just feels like I'm less prepared to make the sacrifices that I know it takes to really perform, because I want to build like an enjoyable and sustainable and like fulfilling whole life. And that means like not sacrificing as many things as perhaps I did when all I cared about was performance. So it's, I don't know, especially in the last couple of years, I've noticed a change in myself where it's like, I just don't want to be training for 3 hours a day anymore. Like I want to go out in the morning, have a nice run, then I want to go be really committed at work, and then I want to come home and have like a bit of time with the dog and like go, see some friends and like hang out with my husband and read a book, and I don't know, like the things that I want have sort of changed a little bit, and it took a while to get there, but yeah, it could come back. I'm like prepared for the future. Maybe the fire will come back and I just train like a bad person again, but we'll see.
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together, training, aging, mindset, and all, you will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
Well, from whatever I can sense, you are not slacking when it comes to the performance department. So, hey, so talking about your work, you are leading some groundbreaking research at Buck, and I heard about this MOVE study, and I believe it stands for Molecular Optimization via Exercise.
Perfect. Yes.
Can you break that down for us? What are you trying to uncover?
Yes. So we all know that exercise is good for us as we age. If you have a higher VO2 max, you tend to live longer, you tend to have fewer health conditions. Lots of studies have been done by people in the exercise physiology field looking at like muscle function, for example, and exercise training and aging. But at the Buck, our bread and butter is looking at what we call the hallmarks of aging. So those include things like inflammation, oxidative stress, DNA damage, cellular senescence. So that's when cells turn into like zombie cells, cell communication. We have these, the hallmarks of aging are things which change in every system of the body with age. So if the old approach to health and disease was to look at organ systems in silos. So we would look at like brain health, and we would be looking at plaques and tangles with Alzheimer's disease, for example, or like neuron function. But the hallmarks of aging kind of distills down the changes into the most kind of pure form, things that are very, very conserved in maybe the brain, maybe the heart, maybe the skin, maybe the muscle, and things that we can look for to kind of measure aging in all systems of the body. And so that approach had never been applied to aging athletes. So we know that there are better outcomes, but we didn't know whether that's because of a change in these fundamental conserved hallmarks of aging. And so what we're doing with the MOVE study is really asking the question, is exercise anti-aging on the most sort of fundamental hallmarks of aging level? As I mentioned before, it's surprisingly hard to recruit a really good elite athlete cohort, older adult athlete cohort. And when we started designing the study, we had a lot of conversations around whether, how important was it that people were actually lifelong exercisers? What if there's some people, they start sport in their 40s perhaps, and now they're in their 60s? Do we actually want people who have been active their whole lives or competing their whole lives, and like what does that look like for women, because 65 is around the time that Title IX came in. Not all women had access to sport at that point. So we spent some time thinking about like what do we want this cohort to look like. In the end, we have required that people be pretty consistently active across their lifespan, but also still are training in a structured way. Now, that's the best way to describe it, because it's really hard to say you have to be doing more than like this many hours a week or whatever. But it's like you can tell when you talk to an athlete, they're like, okay, Tuesday is track day, Thursday is tempo day, Saturday is long run day, and like they have ideas about how their training is intentional. It has some structure and some progression. Often, sometimes people have competed their whole lives and then they're not competing anymore, but they're still training in like a structured way and running with people faster than them or cycling with people faster than them. And so competition isn't a prerequisite to be in the study, but again, it's something we look for to see, really define this very, very high caliber cohort. We are recruiting 40 people who are athletes and 40 people who are, I kind of joke, like allergic to exercise. So they're healthy, but, they may be, like my mum would be a great example of this. My mum, she'll like, tootle on her bike down to the beach with my dad. They'll kind of like go for walks. She looks in great shape. She's pretty healthy, but she doesn't train. She's never been an athlete. So that's the kind of person we're looking for as our controls, like, people who are in quite good condition, but they just don't and have never really like trained. Though we had one woman come in the study, she's like, yeah, I did run a marathon once. I trained for 8 weeks and then I ran the marathon and I've never run again. I was like, okay, well, like good for you doing that. Like that like boggles my mind, because whenever I train, that's the idea of doing a 5-hour marathon of 8 weeks of training is kind of, that's shows some guts to me. But that was kind of an example of someone who kind of dipped into exercise one time, wasn't for them, and then they've not done it any since. So the study has these two cohorts: our athlete cohort, very, very unique, very very, very well trained, long history of training, and then our sedentary or non-exercise cohort who are healthy. And the idea there is like, we study aging now, and this I hope this will blow your mind a little bit, but like when we study aging, we study it in people who are like normal American level of active, which is definitely lower than should be, right? So our current ideas around healthy aging are actually it'd be like studying lung health in smokers. It's just like, well, we've got this big confounding factor that most people are sedentary. And this is a recent thing, you probably heard that sitting is the new smoking, like adage, it's sort of thrown around soundbite, like in how risky being sedentary is. It's not always been this way. In the last like 50 to 60 years, we've got increasingly sedentary because of the types of work that we do and things like that. And so, all of these scientists and all these people were studying aging, but we're studying it in these people who have this big confounding factor. So along with my collaborator, Dr. Simon Mellor, who's like the muscle guru at the Buck, yeah, he really thinks that this athlete cohort, this very, very active cohort, they're probably representing like gold standard aging, because this is more like the level of activity that would have been typical that we should be doing. And he thinks that our healthy cohort, even though it might be considered gold standard for regular aging research, is actually not the gold standard. And so his kind of disruptive idea is that if we're trying to find a drug to treat aging, or if we have this idea that we can reverse aging, well, it has to at least be as good as exercise, because if you've got your athletes are up here and then healthy people are kind of down here in terms of function, if we can use a drug and bring people up to here, it's still not better than exercise. So a real anti-aging drug would be something that could take someone who has already good aging and then make it better. So that's his kind of disruptive idea. So the ultimate aim is to understand if exercise is anti-aging, which pathways are most affected. I mean, I guess I should say as well that I would have to be upfront at the start, like potentially exercise might not be anti-aging on a molecular level. That would be like not my worst nightmare, but it'd be helpful to know. And we had some people in the audience of talks I've given say, well, these people do pretty extreme exercise. Don't you think this might be too much, and too much exercise is bad for you? And like all the inflammation and joint damage, damage to the body. Like, are you prepared to find that your athlete cohort actually has like bad hallmarks of aging? And I'm like, yeah, that would be a finding. I'm kind of ready to see that. It would be it's perfectly possible. That's the thing about science. You kind of have to have things that you expect to see happen, but not get too attached to any outcome. And, so what I hope to find is that exercise is anti-aging, but, also have to be prepared for the possibility that too much exercise might be bad for you in terms of aging biology. I don't know whether it would change what I do, because I still believe ultimately in all of that, like functional data that we've seen. But, if we can understand the effects of exercise on all of these different triggers of aging, which ones are most important, then we might understand how to better manipulate that, let's just say, in the future for other people, and potentially using therapeutics, things like that. So that's kind of the big vision with this project.
Excellent. Well, thank you for walking us down through the goals of the project and the hypotheses going into it that you're trying to either prove or disprove. Taking this a little bit further, a couple of questions to ask you. One is, you talked about the sample groups that you're working with. I think you said 40 people who are
40
top
athletes, 40 non-athletes.
non-athletes.
Yeah.
So of those 40 athletes, are these necessarily, let's say, lifelong athletes, or people who really only got bit by the bug, let's say, in their 30s or later? Do they also have a chance to qualify to be in this group?
Yes.
Give a sense of who those people are.
Yeah. So I would say is probably about a 50-50 split between people who, everyone has always been like relatively active. Often people might have had like a down decade. Like a lot of people like, yeah, in my 40s, I had kids, I didn't do very much. That's, maybe like 3 out of 10 people have that kind of, active, little bit of less active, very active now. Everyone has been since, high school and college, very active, either, just kind of getting around a lot on a bike and going to the gym and jogging, that kind of thing. They're all kind of within the last 10 years have been like pretty serious competitors. But there isn't anyone in the group who didn't really do anything until their 40s. You can see there are more people in my group who got more serious as they got older, but they have all been very active people most of their lives. And then maybe 3 or 4 out of the 10 have been people that have, it is more commonly with the men than with the women, who have competed in track in college and have just been competing their whole lives. So it's definitely more common with men than women, but there are several both men and women who active, and then more competing sort of since their 40s or 50s. I think our upper age limit is 80. And yesterday I was VO2 max testing someone who was 76, and it's so inspiring. These people are really, really wonderful.
Okay, so you hinted at this already towards my next question, which is, what are the types of, let's say, sports or athletic activities that these people are doing?
Yes.
And then how are you? What parameters are you testing? So I think you mentioned VO2 max
already.
already.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I would love, if I had all of the resources in the world, I would be doing like an endurance cohort, and then maybe, like a team sport cohort, and then maybe a weightlifting cohort. And then maybe, like I would want to be, I think I should say up front that there's still some holes, and this isn't, sadly, I can't be addressing like all types of athletes, because I think, especially outdoor athletes like climbers or hikers, or, that kind of lower intensity, lower like batter on the body, but more kind of sustained. I think that would be like a really powerful intervention for aging. So yeah, the caveat is that I haven't been able to test all of the different types of athletes that I'd have wanted to test, and I would love to get funding and do more different types of athlete cohorts. So with all of that in mind, this first cohort is kind of your classic endurance athlete, predominantly runners and cyclists, mainly because it's very easy to find them, very easy, still lots of like kind of competitions, so you can kind of gauge their training. They can give you times, and you can pop them into like an age grading and get a good idea of people's performance level. It's just saying, and as an active runner myself, I actually found, I find a lot of these people by going to running events and chatting to people and like giving them my business card, and I'll typically bring a list of 15 and 20 names back from, actually the very, very first study participant who I recruited. I was training for my ultramarathon, so I think I was for those of you who know the Bay Area, I was going up and down Mount Tam, which is just north of San Francisco. And I think I'd done 3 TAM summits. So I was doing a lot of climbing and training for this race. And I get up to the top of my 3rd TAM summit and I'm kind of disheveled in my vest, like energy drink everywhere. I'm like, I'm a bit of a sight, let's just say. And these at the top of Mount Tam, there's a fountain and a bathroom, and so I'm sort of hanging out there refilling everything. And these 2 women roll in on their bikes, and I look at them, I'm like, they're older women, and they're at the top of Mount Tam on bikes, and they look like they're pretty serious, cyclists. And I had to figure out a way to not be offensive and go over and be like, hey, you over 65? And, introduce myself to them. And we had a nice conversation in the end. One of them was our very first study participant. She came along and she was in the study. So, it's been easier for me to find endurance athletes through my own connections. It's easier to test them, like on the VO2 max testing. So it's that's why we've started there. I would love to do other types of athletes. So once people are enrolled in the study, we really look at aging very holistically. So we're not just testing physical function, although we do. So in terms of physical function, we do VO2 max testing. So we put people on a bicycle. We decided on the bicycle because I don't really like the idea of people like disappearing off the back of my treadmill when they max out at the end of the test. So the bike, you're sitting down. So when you're done, you just, when it just feels safer. So we enjoy testing on the bike. With a VO2 max test, not only can we measure VO2 max, which is kind of like the engine in your car. Some people have a great engine in a very like average chassis, and they'll be like overall less fast. And sometimes you have people with like a great chassis and an awful engine, and like those things kind of balance out. So the VO2 max tells us how much oxygen your body can burn during exercise. And from that test, we can also look at people's aerobic and anaerobic thresholds, where they cross over into burning more carbs. We can look at the maximum amount of fat that they burn, how hard they're working when they burn that amount of fat. So we can tell a lot about someone's metabolic performance from that test. So we do that. We look at leg strength. So we take them down to the gym, we put them on the leg press machine and look at strength. We do a grip strength test, so squeezing on a dynamometer. Grip strength is a really great predictor of health span and lifespan as well, so we include that. We look at walking speed. We do some balance tests. So it's really kind of like, we call it like almost a geriatric assessment. So all those physical things. We look at body composition, muscle mass, fat mass. We use a special technique called D3 creatine, which is like creatine, like you take as a supplement, but it's got a special label on it. And you take this special labeled creatine, we collect a urine sample, and it tells us, because creatine gets incorporated into our muscles, the amount that is passed in the urine can tell us about muscle mass very accurately. So we look at muscle mass, body composition, physical performance. We look at cognitive performance. So we do some brain tests, the kind of thing that people would be having done if they went again for a doctor's assessment, looking at memory, verbal fluency, attention, things like that as well. And then also we ask people questions about their quality of life, mood, sleep quality, stress, and then socioeconomic status as well. So we really, in terms of the stuff that's not the molecular sampling piece, that's very thorough, and we spend a lot of time measuring things about people. And then in terms of the the hard science, the sample analysis, we collect mainly blood and then also a small muscle sample as well. So from the blood, we can look at immune function, and then also things that are circulating in the blood that might tell us about people's metabolism and resilience. And then from the muscle, we do all kinds of really cool things. This is what's kind of magic about doing this experiment at the Buck. Because we have world-class laboratory steps away from our clinical unit, the muscle sample can be collected, and then within an hour, it's in someone's lab. Simon Meloff cultures can grow cells from an individual donor. So, there's a piece of my leg that's in a cell culture dish, and it's sort of just growing more cells. He can grow the cells like that, and then use those cells for future experiments. So one thing that we do is there's a little dish with a little structure, like kind of a scaffolding across it. You can place the muscles on that scaffolding, and it'll grow into basically a little mini muscle on a dish. And then you can put electricity on it, and your little mini muscle on a dish is going to contract. So it's like Brianna's muscle on a dish exercising. So not only can you look at what is Brianna's muscle releasing into the dish, you could treat it with drugs, or you could train it, exercise it every day and see how my muscle behaves in the dish compared with someone who's sedentary, or so young versus old, sedentary versus active, having this like very, very relevant model that's like from that individual with those that lifelong, we call it like it's kind of a pun, but like muscle memory, like what has happened in the cells of that individual over their lifespan, and can we reflect that in what's happening in the dish. So we look at those things with the muscle. We can do histology, so that's kind of chopping the muscle into bits and looking at it under a microscope to look at the structure, looking at the genes that are expressed, all kinds of things. It's really the amount of data that you can get like really boggles the mind. And so given that we can look so widely at all of the different properties of the genes and the proteins and the structure and the function of the muscle as well, it's a really powerful model to really interrogate aging in muscle in these athletes, and compared with sedentary people. So I'm excited, and hopefully you can tell.
One question I have, which, if it doesn't seem obvious, this study that you're doing, let's say, observing more empirical data about or how these people run through, let's say, certain types of fitness tests, the results, right from grip strength, and then you go down something which is a bit more scientific, which is the VO2 max thing, then that much more scientific, which is looking at their biology, right? Sorry,
Yep.
this is my layman's way of
you're doing
distilling the
great.
pyramid. So you look at those things, but I'm guessing this is done over time to be able to assess changes in that person's data, to see how those metrics are moving as that person is aging. Is that
No,
what you're doing?
that would be what I would love to do. That is what I'm
Okay.
seeking funding for right now. It would be wonderful to turn this cohort into what we call a longitudinal cohort. So bring them back this year, and then in 2 years' time, and then another 2 years after that, and look, as you just described, at aging trajectories in those individuals. That would be wonderful. What we are doing currently is what's called an observational study. So it's like, let's take a snapshot now of these people and compare the differences at this point. So we're relying on the fact that we have taken this good history of their exercise to know that their exposures have been different enough across their lifespan to give us sort of divergence. So this is a single snapshot observational study. It'd be like, again, if we use the smoking analogy of recruiting a bunch of people who had smoked, a pack a day for the last 20 years, and then just picking off the street a bunch of people who had never smoked, and like looking, what changes can we see between these two groups. So that's the approach that we're taking now. And as you just described then, what we would be doing, hopefully, would be to be bringing them back and then look at health outcomes and trajectories for years to come. So I would love to be able to do that. This is a great cohort. It would be much more powerful to be able to follow them longitudinally, but it's hard to secure funding. Like research cycles, a typical research grant is 5 years, and by the time that you've had a year to sort of set up the project and get it going, then it's hard to really do kind of longitudinal stuff. So you need like very good institutional and financial stability to run longitudinal studies. And I'd hope that we can build that. And then we have written into when people sign up to be in the study, they say that they agree that we can recontact them. So that is the possibility that we could do that, and I hope that we can.
Fair enough. I can only imagine how challenging it is to run a study like this, right from recruiting the right cohort and then to be able to study long term. Hopefully you will accomplish that as well, because I feel people will be quite interested in learning on how continuing to exercise may or may not improve their baseline parameters. One thing that I was thinking of, again, it could be like a silly point, and I think you talked about this earlier, which is like this hypothesis that we have, which is, hey, people who exercise should be healthier. Like, it seems like a bit of a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Just based on what we know about, again, anecdotally from the world around us. But I think you're trying to do something greater than just that. Than proving that. Yeah, sorry. Would you mind just going over
Yeah.
this one more point, like what is so special that we're trying to unearth?
Yes. So I mean, there's a few elements to it. Firstly, as you said, we know that big outcomes tend to be better with people who exercise. We don't know why that is. So the first thing that I expect to find might, for example, be that athletes have a very good resistance to inflammation. Pick one key process of aging. We're maybe expecting to identify that athletes have built up a specific strength and resilience in that one or two. Like, what are the most important contributors to this aging resilience that athletes have? Firstly, identifying why that is, because then that allows us to unpick and kind of go back 20 years earlier and say, well, okay, what we need is to be training you specifically or providing a stimulus that helps you. Let's say, for argument's sake, our athlete group is very resistant to, or very robust, has a very robust and healthy inflammatory and inflammation and then resolving inflammation response, like post-exercise, let's just say. We can then try and study which elements of exercise really build up that response, and people could be kind of doubling down into strategies that really promote that early on. So it would take some of the guesswork out of why is exercise good for aging from a therapeutics perspective. There's a lot of conditions, and I mean, something as insidious and as maybe it's innocuous seeming as like bed rest. And I was talking to my physician colleague about this the other day, and this is relevant. It's relevant for young people, but it becomes more and more relevant as you age. Or like limb immobilization, you have a cut, so you break your arm, you're in your 30s, and you break your arm in your 40s, and you break your arm. If you can't move around, you decline pretty quickly, and as you get older, you decline even more quickly, and as you get older, it's also harder and harder to get that back. And so if we can understand some of the properties that makes exercise anti-aging, then we know what areas of biology to zoom in on that could be treatments or helpful for those kind of conditions that are almost like unavoidable just as a course of like of living. So there is therapeutic applications. We're understanding this biology better as well. And that, for me, a successful outcome would be identifying the key pathways, understanding, seeing if we can find ways to train or boost those pathways either earlier in life or restore them later in life. And then potentially also, if these pathways are also implicated in conditions or just conditions or life situations like bed rest, or conditions like sarcopenia, which is like premature muscle wasting, which happens again as we age. Like, if we can understand how these things that are boosted by exercise, how they work, then that gives us a potential angle into sort of treating those diseases as well.
Thanks for humoring me. This is really juicy stuff here. If I understood correctly, you doing this to be able to also identify some things that are so relevant to all of us around certain types of exercises, perhaps certain things we can do to combat some of this decline that may happen inevitably as disease, accidents may disrupt our aging process. I'm not sure where we are with this study today, but are there any immediate takeaways for us, Brianna, on some things we can maybe double down on, some things we should?
You'll have to have me back on in maybe like a year's time. So at the moment, we started recruiting in November. So we've recruited about 20 people, so about a quarter of the way through. A lot of them have been athletes so far. So a lot of the, I guess, reflections I have on the study so far are really just from doing the exercise history interviews with the people, and learning about their how sports has been a part, and athletics has been like a part of their life, and how they feel now. So I guess what I would share with you all and the listeners, and again, I'm sure I don't have to convince anyone of this, is that it seems that exercise and the purpose that people find through sport, and the sense of belonging and the motivation and all of those things is just really, really powerful. That people pick goals that are like stretches, but that they pick goals that shift and change as they age, that are still appropriately challenging, that get them excited, they seem like very, like the exercise is very fulfilling for them. And that's all something that we can all aspire towards. It's been very, very motivating and inspiring to see how people continue to push themselves and get purpose and satisfaction from sport. So I'd want people listening to this to take away that exercise is so important, not just for our physical health, but also for our sense of self, purpose, connection, all of those things. And just to encourage people that, wherever they're at with it, again, I've heard exercise described as a practice or a habit or something that we should be doing, like with brushing our teeth. It's just something that is so good for us. Again, sure, I don't need to convince all of your listeners of that, but to reaffirm that there are lots of people living really well doing these things. I hope that we'll have, and then again, fitness therapy. Lots of people, the 80-year-olds are as fit as the top 90% of like 30 and 40-year-olds. I put them on my machine and we have like a chart with the percentiles, and I've yet to test someone who has not been like off the chart for 2 decades younger. And that's also really, really inspiring. Again, not surprising, they are training, but it's reversing their aging in terms of the VO2 max by as much as 20 years. And that's really powerful. One thing I'd say is in the lead up to setting up the study, there was some really interesting research by 2 scientists called Lazarus and Harridge, who are based over in the UK. And they had done some plots where they had plotted VO2 max across the lifespan. And in the very highest brackets of VO2 max, there's generally not that many older people. And then in the very lowest brackets of VO2 max, there's generally not very many younger people. But really in the middle, in those middle ranges of VO2 max, training matters more than age. And it's interesting because a lot of the, VO2 max for an individual, it's always been kind of said over and over again, your VO2 max declines with age. And it does on average. And if you track yourself as an individual, but just because you're in your 50s, you could still have a higher VO2 max than a lot of 30-year-olds if you're trained. So training and being active, it's something that we can all do right here, right now, and keep doing, and it is making a difference to our aging. We see that in this cohort as well. So what else to say? We haven't done very many of our sedentary people yet, so I can't really compare, but I would say that it's been very interesting to see the visual quality of the muscle samples that we get from our athletes. Muscle biopsy samples are kind of the size of a pea. It's a couple of 100 milligrams, like kind of small. But when it comes from an athlete compared with some of our sedentary people, you can just even see in the muscle tissue, it looks a bit like, like a nice sashimi compared with, it like holds its shape. It's red. You can tell that it's got good, you can tell it's good quality tissues, whereas from someone who doesn't exercise, when it comes out, it kind of goes like it's sort of like kind of goopy. You can tell that the muscle isn't like as good quality. So you can even just having not run any analysis, we can see that the tissue is not as good quality. It's more kind of fatty, less structure, more kind of like less dense. So we can see a lot of things that are different in our cohorts even just now before we've done any analysis. All things which I think kind of continue to hammer home the point that exercise is important. And what we hope to be able to answer when we do that molecular analysis is how. And so then how can we boost it, as I said earlier.
Wonderful. Well, sounds like early results seem to indicate that exercise indeed is beneficial, and we'll have to keep in touch, and we'll have to have you back here maybe when the study is more mature. Moving on, I understand, Brianna, that you have spent a lot of your career also in understanding how we fuel endurance and performance and longevity.
Yes.
So I just asked this upfront question, which is, do you ever look at traditional sports nutrition and think, wow, we have been doing it all wrong?
Gosh. Nutrition is such a thorny question because everyone eats and so everyone has an opinion. And especially in sports, everyone has different gut tolerances. Everyone, like I guess I'll preface everything that I say right now by saying that everyone should be trying out things in training first. Never listen to someone on a podcast and then do it for the first day on your half marathon, please. You surprise, lots of people do that kind of thing. Try things out in training. Sports nutrition research has historically been very focused on cohorts that are like 20 to 25-year-old white men. So like I would, again, a lot of the research that guides best practice now isn't even done in women. So that's a big problem. And I guess I would defend researchers by saying that it's hard, as you said, it's really hard to run these studies anyway. And if you add in we want to control for where women are in their menstrual cycle, a lot of sports and exercise science studies are typically done by like PhD master's program. They're like, there's not such a big cohort of like really professional sports science researchers. So you've got to do this project in 18 months or 2 years for your masters. Like, it's going to be difficult for you to recruit and then bring them back at specific stages of the menstrual cycle. It's hard. I get it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be at least raising it as a caveat to all of this research. So lots of the research is only done in men. Lots of the research is especially done in younger men. A lot of the paradigms that are used to test exercise performance in the lab don't represent how the actual demands of competition. So, for example, one of the papers that came out that I was part of during my PhD, we tested ketone drinks in cyclists, and we found that the ketone drinks improved performance. But it was an interesting study from a metabolic perspective, and that's why we as a scientist were interested in the metabolism. But everyone in the press focused in on this performance result, which is fine. It was part of the study. However, it was the paradigm that we used was fasted 1 hour pre-fatigue into a 30-minute time trial, and like, who actually races like that? So it's like, the soundbite is that ketones improve performance. The reality is that it was under this kind of like not very real world setting. So whenever you want to try and peel through the layers of the onion of whatever research it is that's supporting your conclusions, that every time I kind of dig into sports science research, my mind kind of gets blown. So recently I was reviewing a paper that was written by people who were kind of more pro low carb diets for athletes, and they made this statement that I thought was wild, which was I'm trying to remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, there has been no dose response established between amount of carbohydrate that you consume and performance. And I was like, what? Like, what? I was like, I'm always being told that I need to have like this many grams an hour. Like, like, what? I was like, how can they be saying this? As a reviewer, I was like, no, I gotta go and like look at this. So I spent an hour or so, and they were right. There is science around dose of carbohydrate and the amount you can take up. There is science around dose of carbohydrate and the amount that you can burn, but that like 2 + 2 is 5 hasn't been made. Like, so few people, and there's been a few performance studies, but it's not like that consistent that if you can dose 90 grams of carbs an hour, it will improve your performance, which is kind of wild to me. So I approach sports nutrition with a healthy degree of skepticism, with a high degree of, you have to look at what's right for your. I generally am pretty skeptical of anything that a company says when they're trying to sell me a product. I would always try stuff out on myself. I would never assume that because it worked in a study of 15 healthy college-aged men that it's going to work for me. I'm like very, very skeptical, and kind of believe in the power of trying things out for yourself. Based on the science, fine. Like, that's a good place to start. But yes, it's a bit of a wild west, and there are sometimes like some assumptions that are made. And I guess I should be clear. I do still think for myself, I use carbohydrate while I'm doing. I'm a carb fueled athlete myself, but I'm not pounding 120 grams of goo shots every hour. I don't do that. There's also a difference between what's our strategy if you're Eliud Kipchoge and you're trying to run the 2-hour marathon versus your my parents and you're doing your first marathon, it's going to take you 4 or 5 hours, that's, or even just, like a serious enough amateur and you're trying to break 3.5 hours and qualify for Boston, right? Like at that point, it still kind of matters, but it's a whole different fueling system. Your metabolism is different. You might be optimizing for different things. And yeah, so it's the Wild West, and there's an awful lot of context and nuance that gets missed off in the service of sound bites and in the service of simplicity, and in the service of selling products. So I think, yeah, I don't know whether there's one single takeaway from everything that I just said. I don't know
Yeah,
if there's anything you want to pull out a bit more.
yeah, Brianna, for sure. Like, that sounds like for the longest time that was the gospel. If you're doing like a long endurance type activity, then fuel your body with carbohydrates. And well, fun is every type of carbohydrate is different. Eating pizza versus goose shots versus. The other thing I find is now that I've had over, let's say, 60 uh, elite outdoor athletes on my show, and I've been climbing and surfing for most of my life, I find that everybody's diet is so different. It's like a jar of jelly beans. Like they all have, some people are very scientific. Some people will not, they'll do like 100-mile plus ultra runs, and they will not eat any foods. They will just drink liquids. Some people will not drink, will eat all kinds of foods. They'll be slurping pasta at the aid stations, right?
Yep.
So, and sounds like some of these, I think that a lot of these athletes, they're also very self-aware of what works for them, and maybe that's what makes them world class, because they have an intuitive sense of like, hey, these type of foods are good for me and these types are not good for me, and they're relentlessly experimenting. But the rest of us, maybe we don't have that level of self-observation and the ability to keep testing ourselves because we are not professionals. Are there any simple tests or any things we can deploy to understand how the everyday athlete can learn about what works for them? I'll just give you one simple example. Like, I'm currently in Nuevo Leon, Mexico on a long climbing trip, and I realized the other day that going to the crack to climb, like I took some boiled eggs and I felt totally weighed down. Like I was eating boiled eggs, like every 2 hours I eat a boiled egg. On the other hand, I know that typically when I just eat like simple, energy bars or just light foods and just keep snacking, that seems to work better for me, though I am not entirely sure. So again, this is very anecdotal, but I just wanted to relate that a lot of us seem unsure about how do we fuel ourselves. Any advice there?
Yeah. Well, why do you feel unsure? It sounds like you feel better when you do a certain thing. So what makes you still unsure
Sure.
that it's the
Good question. I think because those are like very polarized types of fuel, boiled eggs versus light snacking on energy bars or granola or mandarins, and those are extremes. So I was trying to understand, like, hey, what might be, how can I fine tune things better?
Yeah. That's a hard question. I'll give you some suggestions, and there might be some things that I'm not thinking about. So it depends on the level of rigor that you want to bring to it. On the simplest level, one thing that most of us just don't do well enough, and that I don't do consistently anymore, but used to do, is just having somewhere where you keep a short record of what you did and how you felt. So we take back a lot of power and control if we, you would need like a note on your phone, and you would put the date in, and like today I had boiled eggs, felt heavy. Today I had this. So and just you don't know whether there's a pattern unless you have a way of looking back to see if there's a pattern. So before we do this really over-engineered, like super scientific approach, I think that we maybe don't trust our feelings because we second guess ourselves a lot, but you take some of that second guessing out if you create a way to track. So things I'd suggest tracking would be the specific a little bit of detail about the specific nutrition or hydration, think about what words sort of sum it up for you. So in my training log, when I was on the international rowing team, I had readiness to train and motivation to train. And like, they're being kind of like two different, like, physical, how was I feeling in my body, and how was I feeling like mentally in terms of my energy. So you might want to break it down into like, how was my mental and physical energy, for example. And then, like a section where you might want to note like, yeah, I had to cut my climbing short by an hour because I just ran out of fuel, or actually the sun was going down, I felt like I could have gone for another couple hours. So if you track those things, it doesn't have to be like a full multi-page journal entry. Simplify it, if you can make it something that's easy for you to do, then that's great. You can track, you can start to see those patterns emerge and kind of do it in a thoughtful way. So that's the easiest thing. We all need to facilitate ways that we can trust our own feelings more. And I would say, as you mentioned, I think that elite athletes get very good at that, but it's something we can all learn. There was a really interesting research paper on Grand Tour cyclists, and for those cyclists, their perceived exertion in a workout was as good a predictor as their power pedal, like, output and heart rate data for the load of that session on them. So that is not, I'm pretty sure that can be learned. That's just lots and lots of years of practice. And so you have to start, it's almost like, sometimes I would think about myself as like a black box, and it's like, okay, I have all of this information about my performance. I have my heart rate, and I have my speed, and I have my power, and then I also have how I feel, and like all of these things. And sometimes you have to triangulate between different bits of information. And another example of that is when I competed in the Ironman World Champs in Hawaii, it's really hot, so all of a sudden your heart rate isn't as reliable, or it's different to what you'd be training at like a cooler temperature. And so you can't, like, you look at the heart rate, you're like, oh, that doesn't look like kind of where I wanted to be. Like, well, my effort's about right, and powers, like, you kind of like look at these different things and weight them differently, with not one or other of them being kind of the be all or end all. So build up ways to build more confidence in your feelings, however that is. Tracking would help. You can track more objective biological data. Now there are so many different wearables. So now, like my watch is a Garmin. Overnight, it tracks my heart rate variability. And so something that would tell you about how well you fueled in your workout, or your climbing trip, or your long hike, would be the quality of your sleep and how your body is actually kind of responding, and the stress that the device can detect overnight. So, last week, I've been doing this for years. I still make mistakes. I did a 24-mile run, fueled like, 6 out of 10 during the run, didn't completely blow up during the run, but it wasn't enough. And then my recovery was just awful. And all of my metrics, my, objective metrics that my device was picking up, were just in the toilet because I hadn't fueled properly during this run. That could be, and that lots of us have sport watches. There are also like the Aura ring, it's a ring you wear on your finger, the Whoop band, people use that kind of thing. Things that just give you that extra bit of feedback to confirm. Ultimately, I think it should probably be confirming how you're feeling, and not the other way around.
Yeah.
At one time with the Whoop band, I was wearing the Whoop band, and I was doing a half marathon race, and I got up and I was like, I don't want to look at my Whoop score. And I got to the race, and like by accident hit the app, and I had this awful readiness score. And I was like, well, I don't want to see that, because I'm here at the race. I'm doing this race. I had a great race. That was fine. So sometimes you take it with a pinch of salt, or don't let it kind of completely define how you approach things. But that's an extra layer of data you can get. And then if you want to get like kind of super nerdy, nowadays there's more and more consumer technologies for us to actually measure our metabolism at home. So for example, there's continuous glucose monitors. So that's the kind of thing that a diabetic would wear. There isn't good consensus on how people without diabetes should use them. I should preface everything by saying that. It's an interesting way that all of us can now start to see how different foods affect our blood sugar, and how our blood sugar affects how we feel. It's a learning tool. We don't really know yet, because they've been most widely used in people with diabetes. We kind of know what it should look like for people with diabetes. We actually don't really know what like a quote unquote really healthy pattern would look like. But you might notice for yourself that, yeah, you were having the boiled eggs and your blood sugar was kind of maybe even like dipping a bit low, and that didn't feel good. And you're like, okay, well, there's something going on in my metabolism. I also didn't feel very good. So maybe those things kind of combine together and, maybe that's not a good fueling strategy for me. And then on the flip side, if you were every 90 minutes, you were having like a whole, maybe you had 2 goose shots or 3 goose shots every 90 minutes and you were seeing these big spikes and crashes and then that didn't feel very good. And that just gives you something again to say, oh, like I see this pattern, I have this feeling, maybe this thing didn't work. So it can be an interesting window into your metabolism that can be another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We don't know yet. Like I can't tell you, you need to, if you wore a continuous glucose monitor, an ideal profile would look like this, because at the moment we don't really know very well what it looks like for healthy people. And a worry with people is that you give them a continuous glucose monitor and they try and cut out all of their spikes and they end up like fueling wrong. So it's a bit of a fresh area still, kind of understanding how to implement it in the mainstream.
Certainly. Well, that was a very well-rounded answer. And what I love about what you said is, yes, we have all kinds of tools out there, all kinds of wearables and other things, which allow us to track, again, different metrics, which can be very powerful when used judiciously with some caveats. But I love how you underscored the importance of just something simple yet profound, like taking regular notes and observing things. And yes, maybe some of us are gifted and they can just remember, everything that they felt over time. But most of us would be benefited by just taking those simple notes, like how we feeling, what we did, and then be able to refer back. Brianna, I want to talk a little bit about your research with ketones, but I want to be mindful of our time. How are we doing there?
Yeah, I can stay for another 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I have to also run in around that time. Today is a cold day here, super cold. So we are going to do this little adventure to these hot springs we discovered.
Oh, lovely. Lovely. I'm jealous.
Okay, great. So I believe you have done some extensive work with ketones and the benefits beyond just energy, right? My little knowledge, and maybe for a lot of our listeners, about ketones is limited to, at least in my case, my little adventure with trying to adopt a ketogenic diet, which didn't last very long, which was several years ago. So what excites you the most about ketones for aging athletes?
Yes. So my research is focused on drinks that contain ketones. And so the idea is that you can use ketones in a targeted way without having to follow the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is interesting, it's cool, it's distinct and different to what I do. So I'm researching how ketones could be used alongside or instead of carbohydrates to fuel performance, or as a, let's call it like a fourth macronutrient for people with certain metabolic needs, say in the case of aging, where providing ketones as a fuel could be helpful. And then also you alluded to, in the last 10 years or so, people have started to understand that ketones themselves can actually behave like a signal inside the body and activate various pathways that are associated with better health, particularly inflammation. Ketones have been very implicated in that. And so again, the idea is that if we could give you this ketone drink without having to follow the ketogenic diet, you could start to get some of those benefits from a fueling and signaling perspective without having to change your diet. So I guess, like the big research question I've been asking for a number of years now is like, what are the benefits? What are the effects of ketone drinks for performance, for resilience, for healthy aging? What we do know is that ketone drinks are a very powerful way to deliver ketones into the body. So they really do work. When you have one of these drinks, your ketone levels go up. a bit like if you had a goose shot, your sugar levels would go up. So you take one of these drinks and it would almost within 30 minutes, 60 minutes, it would be like you were on the ketogenic diet for weeks. So it's kind of an injection of ketones into the system through a drink typically. Using those as like pre-workouts, post-workouts, we've started to understand the possible ways that they could impact on performance. Like I said, and under certain specific settings, there looks like there might be a performance effect. It's not been very consistently replicated, but again, like there are some individuals who use ketones for performance and like it, and so that's something that individuals could experiment with. Possible benefits there, helping people with kind of like a dual fueling approach, carbohydrates and ketones before exercise. But recently, especially in the sporting field, more and more people have looked at how ketones could be used for recovery. Ketones have been shown to help with resupplying the muscle with glycogen, reducing muscle protein breakdown. And then also, interestingly, obviously this is a dirty word in cycling, but affecting endogenous EPO, so red blood cells and things like that. So there's been a couple of interesting papers that have come out there, and it seems like more scientists using ketones as tools are focusing on ketones as a post-workout, a way to kind of recover quicker, and especially in multi-day events. Like I watched the Tour de France the last few years, and obviously I'm watching for it because it's my field, but I've watched for people, they come over the line, and if they're given a tiny little bottle and they drink it and they pull a funny face because these ketones, they taste pretty bad. Typically I'm like, oh yeah, they're definitely drinking ketones there. So I've seems like a lot of cyclists at the pro level use ketones as a post race refueling strategy. So yeah, that's I don't do quite as much of that sort of sports focused research as I used to. Now we're using ketones in aging, and as I mentioned at the very outset, our metabolism changes with age, especially in metabolically hungry organs like the brain and the heart. And there's a lot of emerging evidence that suggests that ketones can be a really good fuel for the aging brain and the aging heart, especially in a disease setting. So people are looking at ketones for cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, and people are looking at ketones for heart failure. The key theme there is those are both high energy demand organs that work all of the time, right? Like they have very big energy needs. Then as we get older and as we have diseases, one of those hallmarks of aging, which I've mentioned a few times in this podcast, is mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are inside our cells. They make energy from food, and mitochondrial dysfunction happens with age, it happens with disease, and providing ketones can sort of alleviate, provide an alternative to sugar and help provide energy for the heart and the brain. We have collaborators doing that kind of work. Some of our work focuses on frailty, so people who are slowing down and have reduced physical performance and resilience. And again, we're looking at ketones for them too. So a variety. My own work now focuses more on these age-related diseases and aging, and in the sports science field, it seems like people more focused on recovery perhaps than performance. But the idea is delivering ketones as an energy, delivering ketones as a signal without having to follow the ketogenic diet by taking a drink that contains ketones.
Okay, so exogenous ketones. These are ketones we can consume as a supplement. So firstly, can one just go over to a sports nutrition store and buy ketones off the shelf? Are they readily available now in the West?
There's an increasing number of companies that sell these products on the internet as well. So when I started working on this field 10 years ago, there was only one or two places that made them, and now there's a number of places that make them.
Okay, got it. So again, so over-the-counter ketones. It sounds like it's almost a shortcut to ketosis without giving up like pizza.
Yeah, it's different, right? So I think the thing that I should emphasize, I said ketone drinks are not the ketogenic diet. If you're on the ketogenic diet, you're lowering your carbohydrate intake. So you're going to get a whole range of different benefits, right? You're going to be lowering your carbohydrate intake, lowering those sugar and insulin, like spikes and troughs. Like all of that happens because of the lower dietary carbohydrate intake. You're also, once you lower your sugar, lower your insulin, your body starts to break down its own fat. That's great for weight loss. That's good for metabolism. Like all of those things are upstream of the effects of ketones themselves. So when I try and explain it to people, it's like a Venn diagram where there's benefits of endogenous ketosis and ketogenic diets and fasting and things where you're triggering the body to make ketones, those benefits come from lower sugar, lower calories, lower insulin, more fat burning, and making ketones. But then you have the ketones in the blood, and then those benefits are kind of overlap with the ketone drinks, which is once the ketones in the blood, they can be an energy, they can be a signal. And so what my research is trying to tease apart is like how much is there an overlap of this Venn diagram? How much, if any, of the benefits of a ketogenic diet can we replicate with ketone drinks? So, but the key thing here is like once the ketones are present in the blood, they can be used as an energy, they can be used as a signal, regardless of where they came from. It's not even a shortcut. It's just like a whole different approach to, and you're doing it for different reasons. Like if you are an athlete, you want to maybe be fueling with carbohydrates, so you don't want to be on the ketogenic diet, but you can still tap into ketones occasionally on demand. In a therapeutic sense, if you are caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease, it might be really hard to put them on a ketogenic diet because of their, cognitive status. But you could use ketone drinks in those people. You could drop those in. That could be a more accessible way to give that person some of the benefits of ketones.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that nuance between some of the other benefits that the ketogenic diet produces and what are the benefits of consuming ketones exogenously. So again, I come back to trying to get some real world advice from you, which is again for the everyday person, who's concerned with aging, also wants performance. What would you advise them about on how should they manage their diet?
Mm-hmm.
Between which type of modality should they embrace and when? It's a confusing landscape.
Yeah.
And you mentioned some things already between, let's say, taking on a ketogenic diet, fasting, taking things orally.
Okay. All right. Again, preface this up front by saying everyone's different, and if you do something and it doesn't feel good for you, you should not do that thing. Gosh, I took a phone call the other day from a lady who was using a supplement that had kind of been developed in conjunction with it. It wasn't anything to do with me particularly, but she called up the buck and was like, yeah, I take this and it gives me heartburn every time, but I'm still taking it. Like, you should just stop. She's like, is it good for me? I'm like, if you're having heartburn every day when you're taking this supplement, you should just stop. Please just stop. So with that context in mind, if you're doing something and it doesn't feel good for you, maybe try and debug it a little bit, try some different ways of approaching it, but do not continue with things that don't work for you. So I guess my overall advice for people is what we want with physical function and metabolic function is flexibility. I think, and this is something I've had to think about in my own life, when you're training for performance to be really good at one thing, you need to be specialized, and the demands for that are different to perhaps what we're thinking about as a ageless athlete community, where we want to perform, sure, but we also want to be robust and building like health for the long term. So I think that really you want to be metabolically flexible. It's fine to do a day of low intensity fasted training, but if you want to do high quality interval training, then you're going to need some carbohydrates for that. So, and really we're seeing this more and more with some of the like professional cyclists, that they'll do some lower carbohydrate training, some higher carbohydrate training. I think that locking your body into one or other metabolic state is not really desirable. What we really want is to be able to fuel appropriately for the work that you're doing. If you're going out for a 1 hour easy run, then you probably, like I did this morning, it's probably okay that I just had a tablespoon of peanut butter before that. But if I was going out and I was about to do, a 13-mile half marathon prep run with intervals, then that would be, a different story, and you want to be fueling appropriately before that. So really focusing on flexibility, using different fuels, fueling for the work appropriately, and hydration as well, obviously really important, to just going out and like feeling good every day.
Fantastic. Most of our listeners are active and they want to stay that way for life. What are maybe 2 or 3 key things, Brianna, that they should focus on to maintain that peak metabolic health stage as they age?
Yeah, I think if you can, like I said earlier, we're trying to stack up a number of good decisions so that ultimately they are more than the number of bad decisions. This isn't perfection all the time. This is like striving towards, a little bit better every day. So I think, if you can reduce your consumption of things that come from a package, reduce your number of things that you're eating where you don't know the name of the fifth thing on the ingredients list, focusing on whole foods and real foods, that's something that we should all, just be kind of trying to prioritize in a way that's going to be setting us up to be healthy, making sure, especially for women, we do tend to underfuel because we're kind of concerned around like body image and stuff. And, that's not good for our health, but also not good for our performance. So fueling appropriately with whole foods before and after exercise is vitally important for long-term health. And then in terms of just also the types of exercise you do as you age, it's really important to make sure you're incorporating strength training. It's going to help you avoid injury, especially for sports like running, where there's a lot of impact and a lot of sort of stresses and strains. But strength, flexibility, so you mentioned you're a climber and a surfer, you want to be able to have that reach and the strength at extremes of motion. These are all things like if we can it only gets harder to build them back up again as you get older. So you want to go back to another question you asked, like the better foundations you can lay when you're younger, or the better you can kind of maintain your foundations in your 40s and 50s, the better function that you're going to have when you're in your 70s or 80s. So really despecializing yourself as much as possible, doing flexibility, doing balance is really important. Doing accessory strength work, keeping in some cardio. If you don't like that like intense stuff, you still need to do it. We need to do a little bit of everything. The kind of the goal for optimal health is to do as much as you can and then bring in some of these other things wherever you can possible as well. But it doesn't have to be perfect all of the time. Perfect is the enemy of the good.
Lovely. And then maybe last question, Brianna. So throughout your career, from elite rowing to the cutting edge research that you do now, what may be the single biggest lesson you have learned about sustaining performance over a lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said it a few times, the point that I just made about not being discouraged if you can't achieve perfection. You only get anywhere in life if you show up day after day after day. And, I was always like in my teens going through rowing and really, up into my early 20s as well. It always felt like I was like fourth place, third place, fourth place, third place. I would just show up year after year after year. And, some people have talent, but yeah, what is it? It's hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard enough. That kind of thing as well. Really, consistency is king. And you see this now with people who run through injuries and then they're off for 6 weeks and then they're back at square one. Like really whatever you can do to listen to your body, build consistency, and just show up. Just keep showing up, keep showing up, whatever it takes for you to need to be able to show up, ways to make it enjoyable, ways to make it nourishing for your soul, ways to build community, like whatever it takes so that you can keep showing up for yourself. That's going to be how you, achieve the best performance that you can over time. And like there are times when you have to make sacrifices, but it's not, going back to everything being a habit. It shouldn't consistently be a sacrifice. It should be, it's nourishing and sustaining as well.
Keep showing up. Yeah. Words to live by. If listeners want to stay abreast of the work you're doing, Brianna, and learn more about the research, and then also I sense that many people listening could also be good target
Absolutely.
subjects for your studies.
Yes.
How can they be of service?
So I'm on X. I'm at Brianna Stubbs. That's where, I'm a lot less active there than I used to be, but that's the best way to keep up with me. You can find out more about our research if you go to the Buck Institute website. So type into Google Buck Institute, BUCK. Actually, it's on my hat here. And from there, we have information about the studies that we're running, information about all of the research that's going on at Buck. There's an excellent podcast that is released by the Buck with other interviews with other scientists about different elements of aging. There's a free biology of aging course. And also from the website, you can sign up and put your name on our interest list to be contacted for our clinical trials. And best if you're in the Bay Area, because at the moment we don't do any remote trials, but lots of stuff going on. And if people live in the Bay Area, they're welcome to participate. And we always treat our research participants like they're the stars of the show. So I'm hopefully people would enjoy a visit. And we do tours as well. Like if you're local, you should definitely come. The building was designed by I.M. Pei, who's a famous architect who does lots of, very stunning, and it's, up a mountain, very beautiful, and people can come take a tour and learn more about the science as well.
They can run up to the building and get
Yeah.
some exercise.
Absolutely.
Brianna, thank you so much for giving us your precious time this Friday morning and for sharing so much of your research and your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Kush.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Ageless Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review, crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter their age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless. Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through prior episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.